Tzivie, welcome to Human and Holy. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation and to what you have to contribute to this conversation around healing and getting connected to our soul's voices and what that practically looks like. There aren't so many voices, I feel, that can speak to the ways that personal healing and Teshuvah and returning to our neshamas really can be so intrinsically connected, and we can see them all as one path and journey. So I think this is so I'm excited to get to pick your brain and hear from you on this topic. No pressure.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah,
I will say though, I've the last few months I was doing this this online meeting with this group that I was doing a training with, and we had this thing where we would start with the first thing everyone would do is just bring to the table all the parts of them that are in the room, and it was such a good practice because it was a way of it's playing consciously, and so there's this part of me that's I'm so excited to be here. There's another part of me that's a little anxious about the cameras and the lights and being, and that. and then there's a part of me that's, like I said before, that's just so driven to share so much. And I feel like that part of me has to be asked to settle back and, trust that we're going to get through everything I wanted to get through. And yeah, just bringing that all up, it's otherwise it's going to drive me inside. I don't want the anxiousness to drive the conversation,
to be the leader.
or the driven voice to be the leader. So yeah, those are all the parts of me that are in the room right now.
Which voice do you want to be front and center as you're talking?
I just hope that whatever Hashem wants should come out in this conversation. I do feel like they're important ideas, and for me, they were life-altering ideas. And so there's a part of me that does. There's this part of me from when I was a kid. If I would drink delicious chocolate milk, I wanted everyone to taste it.
To have it.
And so there is this part of me, when I taste something amazing, it's driven to share. And I when I sit with it, I recognize that it's a part. It's not my core. So I'm okay with it just sitting in the back seat right now, and the core message, whatever's meant to be shared is gonna get shared.
It's gonna come through. And whatever is meant to be shared by you is also gonna be exactly what whoever is listening to this, needs to hear too.
God willing.
People often speak about that they'll listen to an episode of the podcast and they were I needed that episode this week and I needed that episode this week, this specific message. Because at the timing of people sharing, the exact wording they use, small little stories, we don't know exactly what it is that's going to touch someone's heart. We think we know exactly what message, and if we do it in a certain way, then that's what's going to penetrate. But sometimes it's a random anecdote that you share that you weren't intending to share, or a way you phrased something that you may have never phrased it in that way before, and that's what hits for someone.
I'm going with that.
Yeah. So introduce yourself.
I'm here for the whole thing.
Yes, you're here for the whole thing. I love that you started with that. Thank you.
My name is Tzivie Greenberg. I live in Vancouver, Washington, my husband and I, and our 7 children. It's a small town Chabad, so it's a one-man show. A one-man show with nine men, 9 of us running the show, me and our 7 kids. It's a small town Chabad, so it's everything that you would find in a Chabad, the Hebrew school and the preschool and the women's groups and all that. And thank God, it's been a very meaningful life. Recently, I have been also very much passionate about, engaged with, I guess what has become my own little journey in, I said to you, I called it healing, but I also like to call it Teshuvah. And so I've become involved. There's a lot of people that I speak to, that I counsel, that I give guidance to, that I help them, work through their stuff. And I see it as, I guess, emotional healing for spiritual growth, or I don't know, maybe it's spiritual growth for emotional healing. They're intertwined. I don't know how you can pull them apart. I don't know how they could be separate. To me, if there's proper emotional healing, it will lead to spiritual growth. And true spiritual growth should include emotional healing. So that's a lot of my heart is in that right now.
So you mentioned that this passion of yours came about through your own personal journey. Can you share what sparked that shift for you, where you began to become connected to this concept of Teshuvah, healing?
So can I first even talk about why I'm calling Teshuvah healing?
Yeah.
It's interesting because we we see this a lot in, the way that we learn Hasidus, at least for me. When I say we, I'm talking about me, okay?
Yeah.
We learn Hasidus, we learn a Sikha, on Shulchas, there's this message that we go out with. And it's like we heard the Rebbe say this and then we're sharing it with others. And like recently, everything I read, I'm like, he's talking directly to me. He's talking directly to us. It's not just a message that is for, those people out there who don't know. And like we talk about Teshuvah, we're like, what does Teshuvah mean? It's returning to who we are at our core. It's coming back to our essence. So yeah, if you want to use the Chabad House approach of what that Teshuvah means, it's reminding every single Jew that your life is so much more than this, your mundane, your material, your business and your sports. And you could be living a so much greater, more engaged, meaningful, empowered life. With us, it's the same exact thing. Like, we're going about life, we're putting one foot in front of the other, we're showing up, we're doing a lot of mitzvahs, we're doing a lot of events and things. And then it's like coming back to our core, like we could be doing this with so much joy and so much presence. Like if at my core, I am my godly soul, which I can talk about, like that can be where we go with this. But if at my core, I am my godly soul, and if my godly soul in its DNA is calm, it has clarity, it has confidence, it has joy. We say about, every single morning in davening, we say, joy and confidence is in his place. If I'm describing God, that's my core. Our godly soul doesn't know about Hashem. It is literally a piece of God. And so any of those godlike qualities, compassion, care, courage, confidence, clarity, joy, like that's who I am at my core. So if that's not what's flowing through me, then I need to do Teshuvah and come back to who I am.
You know what I'm noticing about you?
What?
Is that you have those elements to you, like even the way that you're sitting and the way that you're speaking, I can feel those elements that you're describing. And I'm wondering if you always had that experience, like that, like inner calm, even though you spoke about all the different parts that you're bringing to the table, but that even just like the way that you are holding yourself.
I think there's this ability, first of all, thank you.
Sure.
There is an ability, there is even like in my training, and even in just having this awareness. When you have an awareness of all the parts that are coming to the table, when you bring that to your conscious awareness, you're so much easier able to drop into who you are at your core. If all that's running mayhem inside of you and you don't have enough awareness of what's going on, then you just begin to think, oh, this is who I am. But as soon as you go inward and you're like, oh, that's a part of me, that's a part of me, this is who I am at my core, it's so much easier to differentiate and suddenly, and ask those parts to step aside, ask those parts to come back with a new script, ask those parts to, I'm going to deal with you later, and to drop into who you are at your core.
You're saying when you articulate, like, there's this part here, there's this part here, there's this part here, then that's when I can activate or like feel.
When you have self-awareness and you're able, everything inside of us is we're being driven by our godly soul and by our animal consciousness, which I could break down for us.
Please do, yeah.
I'm using the Tanya language here. This is the interesting thing that I did this training in internal family systems. I found myself a therapist in internal family systems because it resonated so deeply. And in that journey, at the exact same time, I was starting to learn the Tanya anew. And it spoke, I was seeing the Tanya in a completely different lens. I was seeing it, it was describing my own personal path towards coming closer to my core, to exposing more of my core. My core is there. What happens is, okay, so I described the godly soul, the godly consciousness. At the same time, we're all made up of an animal consciousness as well. We have our nefesh habahamis, which, like an animal, right? Behema, nefesh habahamis, it comes from that. Much like an animal, its instinct is survival. And all it wants to do is survive.
Right.
Which means it seeks pleasure and it avoids pain. It will gravitate towards anything that feels good, and it will push away from anything that feels unsafe. So all of our survival tools, in addition to obviously the parts of us, it's keeping us alive, it needs to eat and it needs to rest and it needs to do all the things that we need, but it's also all the parts of us keeping us alive in the sense of safety. So all of my survival tools and all of my coping mechanisms, those are my animal consciousness. And that turns out to come out in the form of all the kind of stuff that when I was a kid, it kept me safe. Today as an adult, I recognize and realize how dysfunctional it could be. So coming back to my core means recognizing this is part of my ego consciousness. This is part of my animal soul.
Yeah.
When I have an awareness that this coping mechanism, no, that's not me. I don't have to be socially anxious. I don't have to have jealousy. I don't have to have resentfulness. I don't have to seek outside validation and appreciation. That's all part of my ego. And my ego consciousness, my animal consciousness, so it's all the same words that are interchangeable. I know who I am at my core. And so coming back to who I am simply means I'm able to clear one blockage at a time. My godly soul is here. It's present. It's in everybody. It's literally right there, and there's like a wall blocking. I mean, these are words from my mom and from the Tanya. It's not stuff I'm making up.
Yeah. You said something to me when we spoke about this originally. You described the neshama state as being joyfully present to life, which I have never heard it phrased that way. And I thought it was like such a beautiful and accurate phrasing and such a way to recenter you to what the godly soul's consciousness is. I'm wondering if you could expound on that.
It's interesting. I think that the anecdote that I was sharing with you was that I was sitting with a group of shluchos, and we were coming back from the kinnos, and there was this mental health summit. And one of the girls was mentioning, the young ladies, was saying how someone had raised a question, like when you're struggling or when you're working towards healing and becoming a more whole, when do you know it's enough? Like when, can you look in the mirror and go, okay, I'm fine. I don't need a therapist, or I don't need to be focusing on my mental health. And my instinct was, it's enough when you are joyfully present to life. That is our standard. Anything below that is a standard we got used to. Like, don't settle for anything less than joyfully present to life.
Wow.
And I look around, and that's what I want to wish on everyone. Don't settle for anything less than that. I heard an amazing mashal, actually. It's a woman, Hedy Schleifer, I think. Maybe I'm not even pronouncing her name right. It was a TED Talk from like 10 years ago, but someone sent it to me recently. And she tells this Yiddish parable that she heard from her grandfather of a guy who goes into the tailor. And he shows the tailor, he's like, the suit's not, like the sleeve's too long. The tailor's like, no, for that arm, just hold it like this. So he holds it, he's like, yeah, okay, but what about this arm? It's also not fitting right. He's like, oh, but this arm, hold it like this. And then he's like, points to the leg, and he's like, oh, it's all fixed. And he walks out of the tailor shop like this.
Contorted.
He sees a couple passing by, and the guy says to his wife, he goes, wow, that guy must have an excellent tailor. He's a cripple, and his suit fits so well.
Wow.
And you tell this story and everyone laughs, like, oh, what a silly little, that's us.
That's us.
That's us. That's our godly soul is our core. Our adaptive behavioral suit is our animal consciousness, and we just get used to it. Yeah. We adapt to life by becoming rigid or withdrawn or compulsive or careless or aggressive or needy, literally to survive. And then we identify ourselves as that. And so we seek outside validation and outside appreciation and more achievements and more success and more goals and see me, pick me, choose me. And if you would just go inward, you'd realize like, no, that's not me. I could be joyfully present to life.
Now.
And by the way, the things we do, I was just sharing this with the lady who drove me. I was saying how like, I'm joyfully present to it. And before that it was, and you get to be joyfully present. Like if you're not chasing something and pursuing it and stressed by it and feeling guilty for it, you're able to be present to it.
Well, that's the thing about godly consciousness and animal soul consciousness is that you can tend to fall into godly soul consciousness accidentally in moments throughout your life, but not be operating out of that space consistently. So you might have like moments where you feel that, and then moments where you feel that neediness, that compulsiveness, that jealousy, that like need for validation, etc. So what does it look like to shift from like occasionally feeling connected to it to like being able to show up consistently to your life with that energy?
So the goal would be to, even when you're in those triggered moments, you can still lead from your higher self. So when you're triggered, okay, a silly example. My husband walks into the door and he has his phone piece still on, and he comes home usually always around the same exact time. It's a little bit before dinner, he walks in, and when he walks in on the phone, I get so triggered. I'm like, don't pretend you're here. You came home, get off the phone in the garage, and then walk in and be present. Like, it's almost like he wants to show, I'm here on time, I came, I showed up, everybody, but he's still busy, doing his things. My old self would just get triggered and go into my avoidant method of like, I don't even need you anyway. Like, I'm managing fine. whatever. Like you just, without awareness, there's nothing conscious happening here. I just go into my mode of like, whatever, huh? And now that same trigger could happen, but I lead from my higher self. Instead of reacting from that triggered space, I can speak for it. In other words, instead of speaking from the trigger, I'm speaking for the trigger. The godly soul is the voice. And it can say, I really wish you would finish your conversations before you came home. Like when you come home, just be here, be present, say hello, check in with me. Right? So the trigger still happens, but instead of speaking from the trigger or reacting from the trigger, which is just to go into like, a passive aggressive, you represent that part. That part doesn't get shut away.
So that was so interesting because sometimes it can be presented that you should lead from your highest self. So just smile, just kind of like shove it down. So what are you describing here, which is like, don't lead from your highest self and abandon the rest. Lead from your highest self, but let that voice give voice to whatever else is going on inside.
Perfect. Yes. So that is literally, instead of speaking from the trigger, speak for the trigger. And at my son's bar mitzvah, I did a little talk about this. I was saying how like now your godly soul is fully embodied. It plays a really important role. You still might get angry, and you still might get competitive with your friends, and you still might get hurt when this and this happen. All these things can happen. Your godly soul now plays the role of noticing those things and being the team leader and saying, hey, I noticed how jealous you got when your friend won that. And now that godly soul is going to take the conversation to the parents and say, it was so hurtful to me when he won the prize when I really deserved it. That voice gets represented, but it's not speaking. It's being represented by my calm voice, my clear voice, my confident voice, not my anger and my jealousy speaking up. My anger and jealousy are 100% noticed, 100% attended to, but they're not the voice that shows up at the meeting. So they're sitting there while I represent them.
Oh, interesting. Like you represent the other voices. Like you.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're the adult in the room. Is that how you would describe it?
I'm the godly soul in the room.
I'm the godly soul in the room.
It's interesting because none of those voices are ignored or repressed or asked to, like, I'm sorry, there's no room for you here. And it's so important when it comes literally to everything that we experience in life. There are two voices here. There's our godly soul and there's our animal consciousness, and they both need to be attended to. If I jump and just to my godly soul's approach, like this happened for the good, everything, this is what it was meant to be, because that's true. My godly soul actually, I have such a great value system. I learn about this in Chassidus. We learn about this from when we're born. We know all about Hashgacha Pratis. Our godly soul really could go there easily. You hear disappointing news, you jump to the godly soul perspective. The issue is, we can't bypass the experience of the animal consciousness. The animal consciousness is hurt, it's offended, it's disappointed, it's upset, it's sad, it's pained, whatever it is. And so it is so important for both voices to be experienced. If I listen to my animal consciousness, and when I say my godly soul is turning towards the pain or the grief or the hurt that my animal consciousness is experiencing, and listening and witnessing and holding space for it. Then, just like a little kid who's on the floor throwing a fit. Your kid's on the floor throwing a fit. You're like, no, we missed the flight. It was meant to be. Everything's going to be fine. You could try that.
Yeah.
The kid's going to keep screaming. Or they didn't invite you to the birthday party. I know it's not a big deal. Let's go eat a lollipop and forget about it. The kid's the hurt is going to be still roiling inside of them. They're going to keep being upset about it. The exact same thing is going on internally. We can shut it out, we can pretend it's not there, but it's going to come back to bite us. We're going to come home, we're going to be short with our kids, we're going to be reactive with our spouse, we're just going to be in a bad mood because we're so busy trying to not let that wounded animal consciousness speak up.
Yeah.
Instead, we literally turn towards it, listen, offer it compassion, witness, and then once it feels seen and held and witnessed, it now has space, it's regulated. It now has space to listen to the values that the godly soul has to share. So the only way that this voice can become embodied in a way of da'as is if this voice is heard and witnessed and comforted and given exactly what an animal consciousness needs. It's a child. It's an animal. It needs to be, it doesn't speak the language of the soul. So if I want it to embody the language of the soul because I need it on board to be joyfully present to life, then I have to turn towards it and offer it what it needs. So it's like such a critical part in every single experience we have. We can't bypass, we can't jump to it. You know, a friend of mine the other day was telling me about, she was sharing how, I hadn't seen her in a while, and she does this, you know, those like pyramid programs, like you buy into something and then you get other people to buy under you. You know, I can't remember the company that she.
Oh, like an MLM?
Maybe, I've never heard that, but like you buy into this group and then you get other people to sign up under you and, okay.
And so on and so forth.
And so on and so forth. And then you make money every time somebody down the chain.
It's a pyramid scheme.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she's telling me about this, and I said, "Oh, how's it going?" A lady in my community, and how's it going? And she was telling me how like it's fine, but it was very offensive. Like she was really hurt when somebody who she thought was friends, who actually she had introduced her to me, like that's how I even knew her. She went and signed up under somebody else and not under her, and it was hurtful. She's like, "But I knew right away that that's what was meant to be, and it's fine." And then it happened again, and I said. I like literally just like spoke to her inner child. I was like, did it feel like, did you relate to like when you were in like third or fourth grade and like your friends didn't pick you? And she literally had tears in her eyes. Like she started to cry. And I said, you know, maybe this is happening so that you could heal that little girl. Like you don't have to keep getting offended by what's happening outside of you. Like we're so quick to jump to like, this is what was meant to be. But sometimes the soul perspective is actually it happened so that I could pay attention and be attentive to the hurt and the wounding that my animal consciousness is experiencing. Like we don't have to jump straight to here. Give attention to this. Try to figure out, why did you get so offended? You're a grown-up. You're a big girl. Why are you getting so offended? Like to the point that she started to cry when I brought up memories. There's a reason, because that part of you is still hurting from when you were in fourth grade. And until you're going to deal with it and heal it, you're going to keep getting offended when somebody looks in the other direction when you were putting out a bid for connection. And so that's the godly soul perspective here. Turn towards it. Heal this, and that's the reason it's coming up. Why are things being triggered in our life? Not by accident. If we believe in Hashgacha Pratis, this is Hashgacha Pratis.
So part of reconnecting to the highest self, to the divine self, is healing the animal soul's memories, experiences that cause that hurt?
Let's put it this way. If I described the godly soul to you a minute ago, and that's in me, and that's in you, and that's in everyone, why is that not what's flowing through our system? Why is that what's flowing? Like, if I'm not feeling calm and confident, and like, if all that's not me, if joy and confidence is not flowing through me, why? That doesn't make any sense. And the reason is because of our animal consciousness and all of the ways that it formed throughout life. It formed these wounds, it formed protection. There's walls around my heart right now. Blockages. They're literally serving as blockages that do not allow my godly soul to express itself. They do not allow me access. When it's so chaotic inside, I don't even have access. It's so nice. I'm able to sit here and embody that calm presence as you're saying it.
Totally.
But I know so many people who literally have a hard time. They can't make decisions. They can't decide. They can't be present with their kids. I don't know what the relationship is like with their husband, because if you're not present with yourself, I don't know how you could be present with others. So why? Because there's walls of protection around their heart. Because at some point, they got wounded. They got hurt.
So I want to take us back to that original question of, what was it always like this for you? Like, what has been your journey to getting here, to being able to like feel that divine self channeling through me, where it can lead and be like consciously.
So I would say, you know what? If you didn't know me well, you thought, she's got this together. She's so functional. Everything's working. She has a nice family. She has a nice husband. She looks beautiful. Shlichus, everything's good. And I do look around and I see a lot of people like that. But now, if you know, you know. Like,
I call mask.
When you look and you see the way somebody's moving through life, you're like, I just want to give them a hug. And I say, it could be even better. I promise you. If you're willing to pause and stop distracting yourself with more events and being busier and busier, and go inward and find the light that's hidden inside of you instead of looking for the light elsewhere. You can look for the light elsewhere also, but start by finding it inside of you. It could be even better. So I would say that, like, as my kids are growing up and each one's struggling in their own way, and I shouldn't even say struggling, like my kids just touching the fabric of life, okay? They're humans touching the fabric of life, engaged with their humanity.
Yeah.
And with each one and their little thing, and I'm reading 1,000 books and listening to 1,000 podcasts, and just like, I'm like one of those brains where I'm piecing together, I'm like a little, detective. I'm like collecting information and figuring and diagnosing each one of my kids. And at the same time, I remember somebody asking me, "Do you ever heard of internal family systems?" No, I never heard of it. This was probably like in the early COVID when we were like, all I did was listen to podcasts. And I listened to a podcast with a founder, and then another one, and I was like, wow, this resonates. So I did this online just course, and it resonated so deeply. Like, it gave me such a safe space to feel like, oh my God, I have pain that hasn't even been looked at. Like, it was almost like the safety was created, just the compassionate approach to our humanity. You have an animal consciousness that has been protecting you so well and created this beautiful functional life for you, but it's also masking pain that has never been processed. And no, I don't have any deep trauma, but I do have like parts of me that I literally, the minute they happened, I tucked them away with so much shame. Like, I can't have a need. I can't be this needy. And so that neediness and the shame that balloons around it, and that part of your soul literally gets exiled. It's like, I never ever want you to feel that hurt again. I never ever want you to have to be vulnerable and your vulnerability not met and received and responded to. And so you hide that part of yourself, literally exile it underneath these amazing functional coping mechanisms.
Amazing,
right? They become super functional.
Yeah.
And hearing this approach, this just so much compassion of like, you formed this way because there were parts you're just literally looking to protect. You don't want to ever get hurt again. You don't ever want to feel that pain. And that alone just like opened me up to this like, wow, like it created enough safety for me to find myself an IFS therapist and start doing inner work. And it was life altering. And like I said, at the exact same time, I actually ended up doing like a full proper training with like in internal family systems, because to me, what's amazing is in this process, the therapist doesn't give you guidance. She doesn't listen to you just talk. And it's literally just somebody who's there listening to you bring up something that's triggered. What is it? What's it trying to tell you? Tune in closer, listen to what it is. And you just find your own voice. Like, so you're finding your own wisdom, your own insight. Because again, that's part of I have a capacity. I don't have to listen to what you think and what you say and what you think would be like. As soon as you start clearing these blockages one by one, you suddenly realize like, wow, there's so much internal wisdom here. And so I did the training really because like people call me for guidance, people call me for counseling, and I don't want that top-down approach where I'm being the mashpia telling them what I think. It's like I literally am able to, and I needed to train with that because I'm so good at just imposing my thoughts. So I had to just train to sit back and listen and be like the parts detective and like hear what's coming up.
Detective.
That's practically what you're doing, like a detector, I should say.
Right.
A parts detector. Like, I'm hearing this come up, I'm hearing this come up. Where do you want to, what part do you want to sit with now? And like dive a little deeper. Like, I'll give you a little example of somebody I was just working with. And again, I'm bringing this up because it's so familiar. It was familiar to me. Like, I was able to notice it in a half a second because it was the old me. The part that's just the busy, active. I need to do another event. I need to put this. I need to that. And every time she would slow down, she would just like get into this depressed mood. So of course she's going to keep staying busy. Now, a very well-intended therapist would say, well, maybe you have to start cutting back, step back a little bit. She didn't notice this part that was getting depressed. Like, she was realizing that like at night she would just like, she would be up till 2 a.m. on Instagram or on Netflix or whatever, just wasting time. And so it's like, what's going on? Why are you doing that? Because I hate that I'm so busy. It's not fear. Like, I want to just relax. I want to chill. Okay, so the well-intended therapist or the mashpia who really is able to understand her and even has an idea of about mental health will be like, so maybe stop working a little bit. Like, don't take on that next event, or don't agree to volunteer in your kid's school, or don't also take on that second job. Like, you don't have to, like, step back. But that overworking part would come roaring back because it's a protector. If I skipped to this part, but if she would stop, every time she stopped working, she would get into these awful moods. Why? Because there was a part of her that was, she slowed down, She no longer was able to protect herself from this pain that she was trying to distract herself with. And so the depressed part would come roaring up to be like, no, I'm dissociating. I don't want to go there. So we can keep moving, balls around and keep trying. But when you listen to what's coming up and when you pay attention to what's here, you realize there's a little 4-year-old girl that's in so much pain inside of you that she just needs some attention. Let's go back inside. Let's listen to her pain. Let's hold space for her. Let's try to understand. Let her tell you everything, every memory. Let it come up. Be present with it. And then you won't need these coping mechanisms. In other words, so often we're like one part is managing the other part.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Like I notice, I'm doing this, so let me... It's hyskafia in a sense. If it's not done properly, if it's an old version of hyskafia, we notice something come up. And we realize, that's not good. That's not functional. I don't want to do that. So we bring in another part to manage it. The ideal would be, the hisabcha ideal is when I'm able to pause and notice, why does that come up? So you go into that 4-year-old girl and you heal her and you hold space for her and you witness her pain. And then all these burdens she's able to let go of what she's carrying, so she doesn't need a distractor anymore because she's not going to get depressed every time she stops working.
But also I think that's an interesting point that you brought in about the difference between like managing our humanity versus trying to like really approach our humanity with compassion and creating like a real relationship with it.
It's such a critical, that compassion element is probably the most important ingredient in humanity. And it's in God also. You see it all over. You pay attention to davening of Harachaman HaMerachim Rachim Na'aleinu. It's all over Rachamim. It's all over the Alter Rebbe. Like in the Tanya, you see it so much. It's like, have compassion on those pieces of you that are literally exiled. These are words from the Tanya. I'm obviously paraphrasing. But it talks about like the healing. Like you think, it's self-indulgent. And I've heard that. I've heard that from people. That it seems like, you're so busy doing all these programs and these events and these things. And suddenly you're going inward and it takes time and it takes energy and it takes a lot of processing. It's not just self-indulgent. It's literally why we're here. It's literally why the soul came into the world, to elevate the nefesh habahamis. And there's the parts of your soul that are in galus. Like that, those terms, exile. And we talk about this whole Mitzrayim, going out of exile, leaving over your coping mechanisms, or I shouldn't say coping mechanisms is a modern word. We talk about leaving the constraints. Like, tell me what that doesn't mean, if it doesn't mean to go inside and heal those parts of us that are literally blocking parts of our soul.
Yeah. It's hugely beneficial to any work that we could possibly ever do outwardly too. If we do that internal processing, what's coming up for me that I would love to ask you is that I know that there's different people in the audience that are listening. There are those who are on their own healing journeys and have already like really gone deep in this like inner work of addressing their humanity, their coping mechanisms, etc. Then there are people who feel that functionally dysfunctional and like feel it, are self-aware about it, want to like begin to process it, but have that voice of like, I'm going to go start working on myself. Like I'm supposed to be outward focused and making a difference in the world. Like what's the point really of going there? I'm managing just fine. I am functional. Like nothing is falling apart in my life. I haven't reached rock bottom in any like discernible way. And then there's obviously the more like cynical perspective, which is like maybe they are fully functional and there is no dysfunction, but just like hearing the language of like inner healing work, you calling it Teshuvah, whatever it is, and feeling like, really, is that the Jewish way? Like, do we just go inward and like create an inner sense of safety, or are we here to just like transform the world and make a difference? And like what's going on inside is not the most essential piece. So I just want to like, first, before I ask you the question, I just want to showcase like those three people listening, totally different standpoints. And then the question is what is the Jewish perspective on inner work and healing and the outward work that we do in the world? Like what's the relationship between those two things? What should our focus be? How do we find the balance between those two, etc.? And like if you could keep all those people in mind, I would love it.
First of all, I would start with, and you see this in Basi Lagani, if you want to take the Rebbe as our, the final message to us, our soul came into this world. The Tanya is full of this. Hashem took part of his greatness, his infinite, his splendor, and had to contract it. Why? For the purpose of my soul coming into my body. Mm-hmm. Why? Literally the words to elevate the animal consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's why it's here. Additionally, we're also making this place a dir v'tachtainim. They're not two separate things. They're one and the same. A human being who is not an expression and an embodiment of his godly soul is a lesser functional person. Like we aren't able to be as purposeful and as helpful and as useful when there's a part of me that's in galus. And literally those words, like so I would say A, that's why we're here. B, do it, if you're not doing it for yourself, do it for your kids. What we don't heal, we pass on to our kids. I see it clear as day. My shame around my neediness, I was projecting on every single one of my kids.
Wow.
So when they were needy, I had no tolerance for it. It was so triggering to me. One of my kids, even like, I'm just thinking how she'd speak to me sometimes, get like a lump in her throat. I would notice it. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. Like that is the younger me. Wow. When I couldn't say what I wanted to say, when I felt stifled, when I felt like I'm hurting, but I don't even want to talk about it. And I'd get a lump in my throat when I'm talking about something completely not lump in throat worthy. Wow. And so when I would see my child do that, when in the past, it would be like, it's not a big deal. Like, why are you making a big deal of this? Why are you about to cry when I wasn't that harsh, but that was what I was
feeling.
That's what I was,
right.
And I was projecting it. Yeah. Whether I like it or not, I was projecting that. Today, when I notice it, it's so easy to see you were just deciding if you should leave on Motzei Shabbos or not. And I'm noticing a lump in your throat. What's bothering you? Like what just came up? You obviously, the decision I could help you make, but something is bothering you. Do it for your kids if you don't want to do it for yourself. The other part is, if we're not willing to go inward and heal all the parts of ourselves, how do you're able to relate with others to the extent it's commensurate to how much you're able to relate to yourself. Yeah. If the parts of me that weren't able to be vulnerable, how could I be present in my relationship with my husband without that? I was, but it was a part of me. There was like a huge part of me that wasn't fully there. And so do it for that. And then do it because the Shekhinah is in Galus. The Rebbe would cry when he would talk about that. And why do we see it? It's only when, if there's a part of you that's not able to express itself because it has hurt and it has blockages and it has pain and it has irritability and it has jealousy, whatever's showing up for whoever, there's a part of the Shekhinah in Galus, and that we're here to redeem that. So like those are 101 reasons that this work is important.
Yeah.
But I only answered your last question. What were remind me what the other parts were.
Well, first of all, I love what you just said about how you can only offer to others, to the world, like a contribution that's as deep as you've gone within yourself. The question wasn't really a bunch of questions. It was more like different perspectives, different people who are on their healing journeys, like having this, there's even, I've spoken to who are on their healing journeys who feel like a voice either from the past or inside of themselves that's saying like, maybe this is where is this leading? Or especially because obviously we're speaking about it, and like when you really zoom out on life, it's really clear to see that like if you go deep inside of yourself and you become connected to yourself and you hold yourself with compassion, you could offer that to your children, etc., to other people, you can contribute differently. But when we're in it, it's not linear. We don't see like, okay, if I focus 6 months on unraveling my own inner processes and holding myself with compassion and like addressing inner hurt, then I'm going to be able to show up after that 6 months and like better than ever. It seems like it's more of like a lifestyle, a way of life of.
One of my kids asked me
Teshuvah.
that. One of my kids was like, Ma, this whole healing thing, like, is there an end goal? Like, is it just a lifelong process? First of all, I would say it's a lifelong process because that is the work of the Beinani.
Yeah.
That is the work of the Beinani. The work of the Beinani is to notice every single time we're triggered who I am. I am my godly soul. These are my coping mechanisms. I used to think of the Beinani as literally putting one foot in front of the other. We're just showing up to life. This is what we're here for. This is what Hashem wants. I'm in. I'm just going to keep showing up.
Right.
But the understanding I have today is that, and every single one of us has that potential, and the Rebbe talks about every single one of us having the potential of being a tzaddik. When the Beinani notices a trigger, he doesn't shut it up and say, he doesn't shame it. I'll give you an example. I had part of this pain that I'm processing. There was a part of me that was, again, because it was sitting inside of me all this time. Every time it would pop in, my critic would shut it down and be like, oh, come on, Tzivie, stop being a baby, like enough. or my shaming voice would come in and be like, oh my God, this again, like, can you get over this? It's sitting inside of you for 30 freaking years. Are you not going to let go?
Right.
Or my functional part would be like, don't go there. You have things to do. Do not let that pain in. So the old style Beinani, what I thought, the Hiskafia, what I thought it was a difficult emotion shows up, shut it down. But that's not even true. That's not my godly soul. That's not my godly soul shutting it down. My godly soul shutting down that emotion is going, my godly soul reacting to that emotion is going, tell me, like, what's going on? I see that hurt keeps coming up. And again, talk about Hashgacha Pratis. So when that part gets triggered, instead of me, being like, oh my God, this again, my godly soul is able to go, there's a reason this is being triggered. There's a reason this came up fiercely in the last year for me. And so it's holding space and going, tell me everything you need to say. Cry as many tears as you need to cry. And so once that part was witnessed and held and comforted, it no longer shows up. I'm not lying when I tell you for 30 years, at least once a day, this voice would come up, this painful voice would come into me, and I would shut it out. I would shame it away. I had so much shame around this neediness. Why is this even in me? Why am I thinking about this still? Why does this keep coming up for me?
What was the voice?
This voice of pain, this of an experience that I had, that I never processed, never gave it attention, completely just shut it off and turned it and put it away. And the newer, healthier Beinani perspective is hold space for it. And even the Hiskafia method of the Beinani is, I notice that you're being triggered right now. You're with the kids. I'll come back to you later. It's a compassionate voice. A voice that's a shamer or a distractor or a number or a indulger, whatever it is that you want to call it, that is not your godly soul. That is another part of your animal consciousness that's just trying to protect the system. It doesn't want to deal with the pain. Pain is painful. So when the pain shows up, the entire system goes, uh-oh, what are we going to do? So the shamer comes in and shames it away, and the critic comes in and shuts it down, and the distractor comes in and starts eating, and or planning a new program, or calling somebody else and getting this, whatever it is. All those parts are just trying to balance your system. The godly soul comes in and goes, why is this showing up again? What do you need me to hear? Oh, it's still here? Tell me more. Hold space for it. Turn towards it with compassion. That's how you get to Hisabcha. And I literally experienced that Hisabcha. It no longer shows up. I remember one day taking a walk. We have these gorgeous woods in the back of my house. I literally felt a burden lift off of me.
Wow.
And it was like this forgiveness, this isn't a thing anymore. Like I felt it float away.
Wow.
And the most beautiful thing is, after that, I began to see the entire story from my soul's perspective. I completely understood how every single player, why they were in my life for that reason, literally to help my soul along in this journey. But I could never have arrived at that had I not paid attention to the animal consciousness. It needed to be seen, it needed to be witnessed, it needed to be held, it needed to be comforted, and only then do we get to the godly soul's perspective. And it could happen all at the same time.
Yeah, what comes to mind is that when you're doing that, when you're creating space for that animal soul consciousness experience of whatever experience you had in your life that was causing you so much pain, you're able to identify where that experience ends and I begin.
Yes.
And otherwise, like there's just like such a mishmash inside of you of both of those two things. I'm thinking about Avodas Habirurim, like separating, the process of separating in life. There's also like that inner process of separating, like who am I and what are my experiences that were negative and that shape me. And it's very, very hard to figure out like what are my coping mechanisms and what is my personality, what is my soul's voice and what is my need for validation. You know, like I'm really hearing that, and I love that. Like I love that way of expressing it.
By the way, sometimes when things come up and there's a narrative in our brain, sometimes it is that the godly soul has to go, wait a minute, I see this fear, this is klipa. I see exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to pull the rug out from under me. I see what you're trying to do, and I'm not buying into your script. Not every time do I have to sit and pay attention and listen closer. Sometimes, clear as day, I'm able to see this came here to try to, the klipa is here for a reason. It's working for God. It's working for God to bring out my resources. So sometimes I notice I could shove it away and be like, I see exactly what you're trying to do. I'm not buying in. But when it comes back again, and then it comes back again, and then it comes back again, the Rebbe says, the more geschmacker way, like literally uses those words, is the root of his hapcha. When you look straight in the face, look at it in the face and see, what are you here to teach me?
Wow.
So if we spend our entire life just shoving things away, and I don't want to go there, it's not, I don't want to deal with that, I'm never going to get to the other side. I'm never going to get to the light that's hiding inside of it.
Please zoom in on that story that you just shared. You said that the Rebbe said that the more satisfying way is to look the thing in the eye and say, what are you here to teach me? What is this in response to?
The Rebbe was talking about how sometimes things in life come in to trip us up, and we put it away and we push it away. And the Rebbe gave a few examples. He said, for example, in the story of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings the story of the guy who's trying to distract you from davening. And first of all, just that fact, externalize it. When something is tripping you up inside of you, the first thing you do is just notice, like
Yeah.
that has such a bad rap, those words. Anybody who's doing healing work says, what does it mean? The Tanya's telling me push it away, but I need to sit with this. Is saying, I'm my godly soul. This is not me. The first thing that in the healing process we have to do is notice what our coping mechanisms are and separate, unblend from them. They are not me. And once I'm able to separate them and hold space from them, that's where the work of his hapcha is possible. When I'm completely blended, those parts are triggering me, there's nothing's going on here other than a triggered human. I'm reacting from that space. I'm completely dysregulated. The first step of unblending, of literally Deichei B'Shtei Yadayim, is the beginning of the regulating process. But yeah, the Rebbe brought a different example, I think, with Potiphar. He said, that looks like such an awful story. Like, what could be good about Potiphar's wife?
Right.
What could be good about her? She's trying to seduce Yosef. It looks like a terrible story. He says, even in that story, she had a good intention. She saw that she's supposed to have descendants from Yosef. She didn't know that it was going to be from her daughter. And so she thought she needs to have this relationship with him. And so even in such a story, which looks completely warped, looks klipa, you could see it, me and you look at it and we're like, oh, that's a bad story.
Right.
Even in that, there's a good intention. It says, so everything that comes into your life, there's something deeper in there. It's coming to show you something.
I love that you brought in the pushing out with two hands, which is in reference to Moksha al-Alev, the idea of like the mind ruling over the heart. Because I'm like, that's the obvious next question, and you answered it already, which is that we always hear about this idea of like the mind ruling over the heart, and it always comes up in this conversation around healing. How could Chassidus be emphasizing like pushing something away, pushing away these negative thoughts and experiences if we're describing this like real healing and transformation? So you describing it as unblending, as like really recognizing like this is where I end and this negative experience, pain begins, like that being that's your reading of the mind ruling the heart, is like of pushing out the negative thoughts, is like.
Listen, the mind is our value system. The heart could be our impulses. So the mind ruling the heart means that like I'm not letting my impulses guide me. I'm letting my value system guide me. But once those value systems become internalized, they become part of my heart. That's what da'as is. Da'as, leiv lada'as. The same bilibenu bina. It's in our heart that you're giving us this knowing. So our heart plays a huge role, but it has to be the influence of the mind, so the values, not the controlling.
So that's such an interesting point, because I think there's such a fine line between like the control, like the mind controlling the heart versus the mind naturally inspiring the heart. How would you differentiate between those two things?
I remember writing an essay on this, and I'm so good at reading things, and it just lands on my heart, and I internalize it, and then I forget where I got it from, but it may have been the Rebbe Rashab who actually elaborates on this. And I remember the example I had give, which was paraphrasing the Rebbe Rashab's words, was just like a child who, I give the example that he wants sugar cereal for breakfast. And you'd be like, no, absolutely not. It's a rule in our house. We don't have sugar cereal. And the kid has a fit, but it's like, no, get in the car. We're leaving to school.
Right.
Or you tell the kid, I know you love sugar cereal, but when you eat it, you're hyper in class. And also, I wouldn't want to be your teacher. And not only that, it's going to give you a stomach ache later, and you know how you have that sugar crash. Explain to the kid. He might still be disappointed, but he fully understands now. He senses your compassionate explanation, and he's able to move on. So that's what Mayach Sha'at HaLev is. The Rebbe literally gives that explanation of what Mayach Sha'at HaLev means. It means V'chal levavcha, it's with your full heart. It's not with this part of me that's disgruntled and showing up like I described my old understanding of what the Beinani does.
Right.
V'chal levavcha means I'm on board. I'm fully on board.
Right. Yeah, Beinani, that description of the Beinani is like the Beinani is kind of just like going through the motions of doing the right thing, but is not necessarily like fully there with their heart and soul. And you're describing this like full experience, even though sapcha is usually used for the tzaddik, for a more righteous person that is not like the human struggler. Because part of being a human...
this has been a big conversation for me recently, like what shifted, what changed. Alter Rebbe has a certain language. He brings the tzaddik in. If it's a sefer shalvin anymore, why does he keep describing the tzaddik? Because he wants us to know the ultimate end game. And the Rebbe, in so many footnotes, I had my husband like pull this out for me because I like needed to get to the bottom of it. The Rebbe says, today, every single Jew has the potential to be a tzaddik. Every single Jew at his core is his nefesh elikis. Because even in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe kind of says like, and your nefesh abamis is kind of your first soul, and that's where your life force comes from. The Rebbe footnotes that and says, every single Jew at his core is his godly soul. And every single Jew at his core, like I said, the sikha that the Rebbe was giving about his hapcha, he was talking to me and you.
Yeah.
He wasn't talking to tzaddikim.
Right. So your suggestion
He's talking to us as tzaddikim.
So, yeah, I love that. So basically your suggestion is that
kulam tzaddikim, like what is that supposed to mean?
Over time, this has become more and more possible for the regular person to really achieve like a true transformational healing within their own selves.
Yes. I even think that in the words of the Alter Rebbe, like I think we were misunderstanding him. We were misunderstanding him, and the Rebbe came to us and was like, stop seeing this through your trauma lens. We were a traumatized generation. We were coming from the Nazis and from the communists. And we were living with the shame that they imposed on us. When somebody tortures you and victimizes you, you interpret this message, you internalize this message that I'm a flawed human being. I'm not okay, I'm not worthy. And we all do that as children. Every single time one of our needs went unmet. The safest thing for us was to internalize a message that clearly I'm not lovable, clearly I'm not good enough. Why else? I mean, it's so much safer to internalize that message than to internalize a message that my parent is dysfunctional or that God is cruel. So I come up with a message that like, I'm not good enough. I mean, you had rabbis getting up after the Holocaust and saying it was our fault. And the Rebbe came and was like, whoa, you are all tzaddikim. What kind of language is this? And he was helping us see the Tanya through this lens of like, when the Alter Rebbe talks about these things as disgusting or despicable, he's talking about your coping mechanisms. He's talking about the way that they become so dysfunctional that you're not expressing your godly core. They're not talking about you, who you are at your core.
Well, you described the wounding of being a young person and like those like early attachment wounds, or like those are typically what's used when speaking about the inner child. But I also think that part of this conversation is that like we can perpetuate that wounding in our own life and our own adult relationships, where every single time we interact with someone and our godly soul self is not confirmed, we feel that wounding again and again. And it's like self-inflicted pain that we're constantly wounding ourselves.
So are we wounding ourselves, or are we reacting from that younger child space? Like I wouldn't say if you put out a bid for connection to your spouse and he's busy and he's not able to respond, and you have an anxious attachment style because of your inner child wounding, and you respond with hurt, you're not wounding yourself. You're simply reacting, but from your younger space. All of your young triggers come online. You start firing from that exact space, and so the work here is to go in and heal that, so you no longer respond in that way.
But there is that element where like you are layering so much more pain on top of that original experience because you're experiencing so much disconnection in your relationships. If you show up with like so much anxious attachment, or every time you walk into a room you need like extreme validation in order to feel like okay in the room, then you're going to leave that room in pain. I don't think it's only an expression of the early pain. It's also even if it's like a reflection of an earlier pain. I think that like the consequence of not like facing that part of ourselves is that every time we walk into a room and we are not validated, every time our spouse turns away from us, every time a friend doesn't reach out the way we think they should, every time we get rejected, we do like re-experience.
So it's disproportionate. Like
what's
that
going on.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's disproportionate.
Right.
There's no reason for me to get hurt and upset and offended when my friend doesn't respond to me. She's busy with her life. She has things to do. She is preoccupied with her own stuff. When she doesn't respond, it has nothing to do with me. But if I'm still living through the lens of my childhood wounds, I'm going to get offended every time 24 hours goes by and I haven't heard back.
Yeah.
If I could go in, and so what do? We come up with coping mechanisms. Either we stay away and we stop trying to engage with people, or we get aggressive. If I could go in and heal that inner child and hold space for the pain and comfort it and witness what it experienced, I reparented it. And now when my friend doesn't respond, I might have a moment of disappointment, but it does not speak to my worthiness or my lovability. It's not a reflection of that, and so I'm totally okay. I might say, hey, check in when you can. I needed to know about this, that, but I won't walk around with this sense of like, my whole safety hasn't just been thrown off balance.
No, I totally get what you're saying. And my question is would you say that Hasidus has anything new to offer to like IFS therapy or the healing culture that is current? Like, do you see it as being like a mirror image of each other? That like healing culture is Teshuvah and like, they're not healing culture, like healing, real healing work, inner parenting, etc., reparenting, that's Teshuvah? Or do you see that there is like something additional that Hasidus
So first of
offers?
all, there's two parts here, and I want to make sure I come back to the first one.
Okay.
So there's, first of all, just the idea of the knowing that everything is part of God's plan. And this in the Tanya, as the Tanya outlines this healing process, it gets to the part where it's like, this is all part of your soul's journey. When you have an agenda, I need to get there. This is my life goal. This is what I need to accomplish. And suddenly there's this bump in the way. And every time I bump into it, I'm like, oh, I can't get to where I'm supposed to. I have a spiritual path. I have a spiritual journey. I want to go there.
Right.
When this bumped in the way, it's not, what's in the way is the way, according to Hasidus.
Right.
Deal with this mountain. Don't try to climb over it. I mean, try, but if you keep getting triggered and it keeps showing up in front of you, cut through it and find the light that's in here. Your soul's greatness is going to manifest as you overcome, as you heal, as you go through this struggle. There's light hiding underneath this huge mountain that's in front of you. So that alone, I think, is a huge element. You know, I was working with somebody, and she's a clinical psychologist, and she was doing her own like inner work, and she was struggling with this thing. She's in her 60s, and recently her father passed away. He was a big macher, and they were writing a book about him, and she just got the manuscript, and suddenly all of her childhood pain is re-triggered. She's like, I didn't even exist in his life, and I knew that as a child.
Wow.
But I put that pain away, and she didn't put it away. She thought she put it away. She never let herself feel it, but she remained aloof in every relationship because she was afraid of being hurt. Suddenly it's being triggered again because she's nowhere in the book. She's like, I really I wasn't part of his life.
Wow.
Now, the part of me that's listening to all of her parts come up, I felt this need to interject because she didn't grow up with the, hashgacha pratis that the Baal Shem Tov taught. And I was like, she couldn't tolerate the fact that she had this neediness, that she was, what am I, a big baby? I'm crying all over again. I'm successful. I have things going for me. Like, what's the big deal? Why is this so painful again? And I'm like, because now you have all the tools and it came back into your life and it's here for you to heal. This is where you're going to, every single one of your relationships are going to be enriched if you would just let yourself hold space for that little girl. And so number one, there's that element of like, this is all part of Hashem's plan. This is our way of entering the Geulas, literally as we're healing all these parts. They're pieces of God in Golos. That's literally what it is. And this isn't my terminology. This is from Hasidus. So that's number one. Number two, what I would like to say is that a lot of the healing work that's being done, there's obviously beautiful, wonderful elements. Bringing the soul, instead of using the term inner parent, and instead of using the term, higher self, or whatever people use when they're doing parts work, recognizing that the soul is the healing agent. The soul plays such a critical role, or it could, if we only knew how to lean into it. Like if I could take the Tanya and write it into a therapeutic model, it would be the soul engaging. It's literally a daily dialogue, a constant dialogue between the godly consciousness and the animal consciousness. Maybe not for a tzaddik. The tzaddik, like David HaMelech said, Libi chala b'kirbi, his animal consciousness is just there fully to serve his godly soul.
Right.
But for those of us who still have parts to heal, it's this constant dialogue where the godly soul turns towards the needs and the pain and the anything that the animal consciousness needs, holds space for it with compassion, And then the animal consciousness, now tell me, now that I'm regulated, tell me your point of view. And so that daily internal dialogue is I think it sounds like geula to me, like
To really be in dialogue with our soul.
to be in dialogue with our soul and to recognize that it's the healing agent. It's constantly, when we go in to heal our inner parts, so often, like, let's say you want an apology from someone. You know, a lot of people who've been hurt, they're desperate for an apology. They want to face the person who hurt them and say you're sorry. Essentially, what they really want is they want that person to undo what they did and to fix what they broke and to unhurt the hurt, which I don't think is possible. But you know who could do that? Your godly soul. Your godly soul could hold space. It has so much capacity. Like, if people would just, I think our job, those of us who finally got to know the capacity of our godly soul, can mirror to others that you have this capacity. You can touch your pain. It's not going to kill you. It's not dangerous. It might be very painful, but you have the capacity to hold space for it. Recently, I said to somebody, I said, it's okay to grieve over what happened. And she said, no, I can't cry. If I start crying, I'll never stop. And to me, it was such sad words to hear, because it meant that she literally doesn't know her soul, and she doesn't know the capacity of her soul. And the minute we can mirror that to each other and let each other know that you have space for this. Your godly soul is part of God. It's infinite. It's going to be okay. And it's holy work. Like the Tanya describes this kind of mariros, this bitterness, this crying it for the pain or grief or whatever it is. It describes it as the gvura side of kedusha. Love and joy comes from the chesed side of kedusha, and this comes from it's not a bad thing to be doing. It's exactly what you need to do in order to get to the light on the other side.
And back to what you said at the beginning, you said, like, how do you know when you're done, when you're able to be joyfully present to life?
When you this constant dialogue, this constant awareness, when I'm able to hold space for the pain, I'm able to, there's joy on the other side. You know, your heart has one button. It has one switch button. If you're going to turn off access to the pain or the grief or the difficult emotions, you're also turning access to deep joy and presence. The minute you turn it on, there's a painful experience. All the flood of tears comes gushing through, but you hold space for it and it cries itself out. And maybe sometimes it re-shows up. It might not be done. You might be dealing with external situations that are very challenging and very painful. It might not be something in the past. It might be something you're dealing with in the present. But when you turn your heart off, you're turning off your joy and your joy and presence.
Yeah.
By the way, something else that I think of, and that speaking to all the voices that might be, all the people and all their parts that might get triggered from the things I'm saying. In Chassidus, we're so
Can't forget that. Can never forget that.
I want to speak to all.
You always have to have, like, everyone else's voices in your ears while you talk.
We're in Chassidus, we're so comfortable with this knowing that we're allowed to engage in the mundane.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's how a Jew achieves transcendence.
Right.
We don't
Just touching things.
We don't
objects.
meditate in a
Yes.
mountaintop.
Right.
It's a very sensual religion. We touch, we feel, we sublimate.
Yeah.
That's how we engage with God. That's how our soul experiences transcendence. Not by just sitting alone meditating. It's through the engagement with the material. The exact same thing is true with the soul's engagement with our difficult emotions. They're there for us to sublimate. They're there for us to transform. But if I'm afraid to go near them, I'll never transform them. How am I supposed to transform it if I'm afraid to look at it and touch it?
Yeah.
And not only that, but like I said before about unblending, it's true that with a material, for example, if I become enmeshed in the gullus, I don't have the ability to transform it and turn it into gula.
Yeah.
If my money and my car and my achievements, if they become my identity and I'm so enmeshed in it, I lose my power to transform.
Yeah.
So it's true with our emotions also. When I'm fully blended with my anger or my jealousy or my resentment or my aggressiveness, whatever it is that comes up, I can't transform it. So that unblending, that separating from it, recognizing, like, I am my godly soul. This is not me. This is my animal consciousness. It's my coping mechanisms. It's not me. And the moment I separate from it and know who I am and where my adaptive behavioral suit begins, that's where I have the power to transform it.
Yeah.
We, as humans, we can't deny our humanness. We can't deny the difficult stuff that comes up. It's impossible. You can't deny your humanness, and you don't want to. You don't want to deny your vulnerability because, like I said before, if you shut off access to your heart, you're shutting off access to your heart. But at the same time, we cannot lose sight of our transcendent core. Like, my godly soul has the capacity to touch and be immanent and engaged with this difficult emotion, with this pain, with this grief, and at the same time remain above it. It's like the way we describe God. We describe Hashem as both immanent and transcendent. Mm-hmm. That's the Jew. The Jew is both at once. We are fully engaged. We do not separate it. We're not removed from it. I cannot pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I remain fully aware that I have this godly core that can transcend anything and everything and can hold space for this. And it is the healing agent.
Well, it's able to utilize whatever the physical world is and whatever the human experience is for the godly purpose.
Exactly.
So I can utilize whatever those human struggles, flaws are, etc. Exactly as you said, that's something unique that the Torah brings, the Hasidus brings, is this idea that whatever is happening here in my life is for a purpose. Exactly. That whatever pain I'm going through, whatever this big boulder in my life that looks like it's distraction from the main point is actually something that could be utilized for a higher purpose. And often I think that through that healing journey, through like something really like coming up where someone either reaches rock bottom or they feel the dysfunction sort of like seeping into the pores of their relationships, etc. And they're forced to confront themselves, and they probably didn't really want to go on that journey. But once they're on it, it's kind of like, I have no choice. And then often what I've witnessed is how that often ends up being the catalyst for people finding their own voice, for finding the courage to give, to share. And we always talk about the outward contribution, but it's very hard to actually be giving in a really deep way in the world if you are so blocked internally and if you're not really able to access like an inner sense of safety. So you might be able to put on a mask or utilize like one element of who you are, but you're not going to be able to give like from a deep place inside of yourself, because there will always be a strong blockage in certain areas.
It's protecting. It's just protecting. The main outcome, the most glorious outcome of all of this is your soul is more exposed. When your soul is more exposed, like you have a relationship with Hashem that you never knew you had before.
Yeah.
You have a relationship with every mitzvah like you never had before. It's the immediate consequence. And the immediate consequence also is that when you sense your own soul, you're able to see that in others. When you recognize what my coping mechanisms are and you learn there's no shame around this, that's the way you engage with others. There's no shame, there's no judgment. There's literally this compassionate awareness of what they're struggling with. And you can mirror to them with the compassion, like you have the capacity to overcome this.
Right. I love how you said that your neshama is able to have that, your neshama has a voice in your life, even when you're just doing a mitzvah, like, or you're speaking to Hashem.
Even when.
Not even when, even when. I know, because I'm thinking about relationships and this, and, you know, like when we're doing the mitzvah, I think it's so, like the concept of intention is about being present in the experience of doing the mitzvah. So if you are not present to yourself, present to your life, then there's no way to actually do any godly act with any intention, because there could be like...
Let's give a little leeway. There's some way. There's a minimal way.
I know for myself, just my own experience, I will not like put on anyone else. So for myself, I will say that there could be an imposed intention, but it's not a presence. It's not from the heart. It's not like me being present with this truth. It's like
Steinsaltz says it so well. Steinsaltz says, he's like, we know about love and awe because David HaMelech describes it. He says, but when you do a mitzvah, your heart is supposed to play the same role that your hand is playing. Right. Your hand is putting the tzedakah in. Your heart, you're supposed to feel it. Yeah. It's supposed to throb. And that's what I would say. If we're not there yet, then there's still more work to do. Because I promise you, and I'm speaking from my own experience, it's possible. We are able to feel our love and our awe, and we're able to shed tears when we're davening and when we're doing a mitzvah, just like sometimes it's triggered when you see a glorious sunset. It could happen constantly. And when you're sitting with your kids and when you're engaged with your spouse, like we're supposed to feel love. It's not supposed to be a cognitive process. It's a feeling. And that's the ultimate. Like that's the goal for healing, is to be able to feel your heart.
Feel your heart.
To feel your heart.
So anyone who is in this space of not feeling their heart, let's like end like really directing this message to anyone who's like in that experience. What is the shift? Like what is the beginning of that shift?
The beginning of that shift, I would say, is to start having that inner conversation. When something comes up, when you're triggered, turn towards that part with compassion. I see you. I see you. I see you're hurting. I see you're having a hard time. I see you're stressed. That beginning, that compassionate voice internally is so critical. It's the most important ingredient in life, compassion. It really is. Like any time something comes up, just turn towards it with compassion. Your godly soul is turning toward the triggered part of your animal consciousness. I will say, can I finish with one other thought?
Yeah.
It's actually a mushal I just heard Rabbi Jacobson share the other day. He was talking about, maybe you've heard this, a eagle nest that falls in the wind, and the farmer notices, oh, there's an egg on the ground, and he picks it up as an eagle's egg, but he doesn't know he's a chicken farmer, and he brings it home and he lays it under the hens, and it hatches. Oh, an eagle's born, but nobody notices. There are a bunch of chickens. It looks a little different, but obviously it's a chicken because it just hatched under the chickens. And it lives its life as a chicken. And it's constantly, it just walks around. What do chickens do? They cluck, 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 and they look for food. Like their head's down on the ground. They're not very glorious bird. He lives his whole life as a chicken. And one day he looks up and he sees this beautiful, bold, bald eagle flying in the sky. And he's like, oh my goodness. How glorious would it be to be able to do that? What a gorgeous bird. What a beautiful life. What none of the chickens noticed. The only one that noticed is the eagle. And he had such a longing and such a yearning to just have a different life. Now, I think Rabbi Jacobson's point, his point was that like when you're feeling pain, it doesn't mean you're small. When you're feeling pain, it's because you realize there's lacking. Anyone who doesn't feel pain, they don't feel their heart. So when you're feeling pain, you realize there's lacking. Something in God's world is off balance. There's something I should have that I don't have. So pain it's a beautiful awareness if you feel pain triggered. It's this recognition that I could be living something so much richer and so much better. So I think that was his message, but I heard something completely different in the mashal. To me, the mashal was that eagle would have never known if no one had mirrored to him. Suddenly an eagle flies over him. He's like, that looks like me.
Wow.
That sounds like me. That could be me.
That's good.
Like we live in a prison. Our soul is in prison. We get used to this, like I said, that adaptive behavioral suit. And we just need to mirror to each other the capacity that we have, the greatness. Can you imagine if every mother knew her own soul's greatness and could then mirror that to her kids?
Yeah.
You can't fake it.
No.
You can't fake it. If you don't know it, you can't project it. We might worry about projecting things onto our kids because we're speaking to their egos. We're thinking, oh, that kid's, let him get off his high horse. That's me, my ego, concerned about his ego. But if I know my soul's greatness, I can see it in my child. Yeah. And then I could project to him his soul's grandeur. So the world needs us. We need to move into that space where we know what compassion looks like, feels like, sounds like. We know the capacity of our soul, and we could mirror that to each other.
Beautiful. Exactly as you said, that like you just want to say like what is possible, like it could be so much better. And even just that, like we didn't even get to go into like all the practical elements and how to really like awaken this in your life. But even if this conversation is just like a record or a reminder for anyone who's listening that like it could be so much better. We could be in such a healthy state. We could be awake.
Like if we talk about Geula and we talk about moving to this Geula consciousness and we talk about seeing the world through the lens of our godly soul, to me, this is the process. Like this is how do you go about it? By healing the wounds so that we can begin seeing from the perspective of our godly soul. And I don't know that you could bypass it. I don't know how a human being who has an animal consciousness and a godly consciousness can jump to a space where you only see the God. You're dysregulated. Your body, you cannot absorb information. You cannot access your executive functioning skills when you're sad, mad, angry, when you're blended with one of your wounded parts.
Yeah.
So this to me is the process of us all arriving at this place where we're living from our godly consciousness, or at least leading from our godly consciousness.
Yeah. I think leading is more realistic.
It's more practical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because like all the other parts are always going to be there. And I think that humanity, obviously that's what this whole podcast is about. That's why like this topic is like so, yes, we're being human and holy. But that idea that like we're not trying to escape our humanity and there's no way to, we can't like perform a surgery and like get rid of our humanity. But that humanity is actually going to be like a really big piece of us being able to tap into our soul's voice.
Leading from our godly soul. I think that's it. That's the name. That's how we get to Geula.
leading with our godly soul, and also taking all parts of ourselves with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there space for, there has to be space for the unhealed humanity. There has to be space for the struggle and for
100%.
because like that transformation is obviously like really aspirational, and I think that like it's beautiful to have it as a goal, but it could become like this unrealistic standard, or we could end up just like bypassing to try to get to that transformation because we want to be there. Whereas like the whole process of like really coming there is like, you can start today. You can start today leading with your godly voice. Before everything's healed, before you've made space for everything, you could still bring all those parts of yourself with you.
I'm glad you brought this up because it's so important. This holding space for what comes up is the process of the slow evolving. The other day I was struggling with this thing, how it wasn't the other day, it was a few months ago, and I already watched it evolve. I remember saying how like I'm so when my little kids are around, I'm able to be so present. My older kids call me random times in the day. I'm in the middle of 1,001 things.
Yeah.
And there's a voice in me that's going, Tzivie, just be present with them. Just stay on the phone. Be here with them. This is what they need. And there's another voice going, but I have to do 1,000 things. And there's another voice going, can you just stop having to do 1,000 things? You're trying so hard to be present. Just be present. So there's these voices.
So much.
And my therapist's wise guidance is like, just hold space for that struggle. Just hold space for it. You're a human. Hold space for it. The more you... As long as there's a voice, I need to do this, there's another voice of resistance. There's constantly, these one voice comes up, I have to, one voice comes up, no. The goal is to be able to just relax into what is. Relaxing into what is does not mean I make bad choices. I still know what my values are. I still make my choices according to my values. But when it comes up, just hold space for it. It's a struggle. You're a human. Like the Alter Rebbe says, you're getting frustrated. Have a check-in with your status. You're just a Beinoni. You're not a tzaddik. Like, just hold space for that struggle.
Yeah.
And there can't be this agenda, this driver. The driver's a part. Just when you hold space for it, it slowly stops speaking up. It's like, oh, she heard me. She sees me. She gets me.
Yeah.
The godly voice becomes the authoritative figure inside, and all the other parts don't have. They're like, oh, she's got this. She's in charge.
Right.
The shamer and the critic don't have to speak up when they sense me. She's like, finally, the mother arrived. The mature, evolved, loving mother's here. She's going to take care. We can back down.
We can back down. And also, I mean, that idea of this is who we are, that we're like going to come to, that we're going to deal with some things recurringly. That is part of getting comfortable with our humanity.
Just literally hold space for it.
Yeah.
The agendas, like, the others, they didn't have an agenda. It's like when it says in Merkava, like, I love this example. It's like, they're described as a Merkava because Merkava is just a chariot that follows. It doesn't go, he's turning right, I'd much rather go left. Oh, fine, I'm going to go right.
Right.
They just flowed. They were present.
Yeah.
That ability to be present becomes something we can embody when we stop with the voices. We just slow down and hold space. Just hold space for what you're struggling with.
Yeah.
Stop trying to manage it.
Right.
It'll evolve on its own when there's an authoritative leader. That godly soul becoming more present and more using its voice more often, everybody, all the other parts can relax back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm getting tripped up on that word authoritative leader because it feels harsh.
It's not. So parenting from it's not a dictatorship. Like there's a parent. Maybe I'm using the wrong word, but there's this parenting style of like, I'm in charge. I'm making the rules. Everybody trusts me. It's not mean and disciplinary. It's there's a parenting approach with this.
Okay, that's like specifically with that use it like that.
Unless I'm using the wrong word.
No, not at all. But I hear what you're saying, which is that when there's someone there that's
there's a pilot who's in there's chaos, there's turbulence, but the pilot knows we're gonna be fine, and so everybody can sit back and relax.
Right.
If the pilot was like, oh my gosh, guys, I have no idea how this is gonna end, then everybody's a wreck and everybody's trying to manage.
Yeah.
As soon as the soul takes up more present, is more present, keeps showing up, keeps holding space with compassion, the other voices are like, we don't need to do this anymore. Somebody else is finally in charge. Yeah. They all have good intention. They want me to keep in line. They're trying to just keep my system balanced.
Right. And that trust is that the godly soul also, like, you don't have to have an agenda on your godly soul. Like the godly soul has its own voice.
It's this energetic force of goodness and confidence and calmness and joy.
Love and exuberance and passion and vibrancy. Yeah. I love it.
You have to bring those creative words in. I'm
Well,
more of like
you
a
see-
left brainer.
No, well, I mean, because like I'm like those are. I feel like those are my godly souls adjectives.
absolutely,
You know, it's like
absolutely.
that I always bring it in because I'm always like I
Mine
always
is
imagine
like
this
this
like
clarity.
stoic, exactly, calm, clear, and I'm like passionate, vibrant. Like that's my godly soul. You know, that's my godly soul's voice.
That's
but
the creative
everyone,
side.
yes,
creative
exactly.
is one of the
Creative, yes. The godly soul can be creative too. Thank you so much, Tzivie. This
my
was
joy and
wonderful.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing from your heart. It was like there's so much here.
Thanks for
I
having
could go
me.
for another couple hours, I think.
Thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
אלוקיי זכני נא בתורתך ובמצוותיך לכבד